Hey guys, welcome to the final Alt-Shift-X Patron-only livestream for Game of Thrones Season 7, The Dragon and the Wolf. I've got some slight connection. Alright, hold on one sec. I'm sorry. Hold on one sec. Okay, should be better. How are we all? You all in the chat? You all good? You all ready? You all settled? Hello Brandon, hello Melka Lelka, hello Folps, hello Heidi. Let's talk about this episode. So I think this episode was, fortunately, a better episode than last one. I think more things made sense. I think more things were exciting, and there were certainly some big moments. R plus L equals J, the wall coming down, the death of Littlefinger, and even just the meeting of the supernatural in the political in the dragon pit. All these characters seeing zombies for the first time, I think, was pretty exciting. So lots of cool stuff to talk about in this episode, and obviously it was a huge episode. It was like an hour and a half long. So there's a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any more time and get into it. Is your is the stream health better now? You guys can all hear me okay? Yell if not. But let's begin. So we start with Daenerys arriving at King's Landing. We had Jon arriving at King's Landing, everyone converging on the Capitol, and it occurred to me in this scene that this is the closest that Daenerys has ever come to her goal. Daenerys, for all these years, all this time, has been wanting to come to this city to capture this throne. And she could have taken it this episode if she wanted to. She could fly a dragon right up to the Red Keep, burn whoever got in her way, and she could be sitting on the throne now if she chose to, but she's holding off in the name of peace. And what this reminded me of is that, you know, that vision in Season 2 where Daenerys saw herself walking into the throne room and approaching the Iron Throne and reaching out for the Iron Throne, but not quite grabbing it. Maybe that's what's going to happen in the show. Maybe this is as close as Daenerys will ever get to the Iron Throne. She's in the same city, but she'll never quite reach it. I think that's an interesting possibility. As is the other stuff that goes on in this vision with, like, the burnt out Red Keep. A lot of people have been speculating, like, will it be Daenerys' dragons who burn the Red Keep? Will it be Cersei's wildfire that burns the Red Keep? Will it be the Night King and his dragon burning the Red Keep? Is it ash raining down in this scene, or is it snow? Lots of possibilities. Miriam in the live chat suggests that Dany should have taken the throne this episode. Yeah, I think honestly, like, strategically, she should have turned up at King's Landing on episode 1. Like, all the business with, you know, attacking Castle Rock and the High Garden switcheroo and the White Plot. And let's be real, if Dany wants to take the throne, she should have, if not attacked King's Landing, then at least done a flyby with her dragons, you know, just to show her force and her presence. But yeah, let's not get into that. Zvon's in the chat asks about the sizes of the various armies. We don't really have numbers on that stuff. I think in this season, we were at one point told that the Northern Army was 10,000 people strong, and then we were later told it was 20,000. The Golden Company, they did say, was 20,000 strong in this episode. But yeah, we're not really meant to think about the numbers, I don't think. And then obviously all the characters converge on the Dragon Pit. And the Dragon Pit is a place with a lot of history. Obviously built in the reign of Maegor, was it? I think it was Maegor, who built the Dragon Pit to keep his dragons in, a stable for his dragons. And it kind of was all downhill for the Targaryens from there. With their dragons getting smaller and smaller, as Daenerys talked about this episode, reflecting not only the decline of the Targaryen dynasty, I think, with their shrinking dragons, but maybe also magic in the world. Or, well, whether or not that's the case, I think the decline of the dragons reflects something about the nature of magic in Game of Thrones, because you know, it's described as a sword with no hilt, or a glass sword, all these different analogies to say that magic is something dangerous and something unpredictable and something wild, and it's not something that you can put in a box. A dragon is no slave, Daenerys says in this episode. In the books, even when Rickon says that Shaggy Dog doesn't like chains, these kinds of magical creatures are not things that you can just put in a box, because that kind of magical power just doesn't work that way. Which, of course, raises the question of, like, oh, well, what happens to Dany's dragons when she takes over King's Landing? Is she going to chain them up in a dragon pit of her own? And if not, is she going to let the dragons fly around eating people, eating children and sheep like they were in Meereen? So many of Dany's problems that she faced in Meereen, so many of the political problems, the social problems, she's going to have in Westeros as well. And since she didn't work out a solution to so many of those problems in Meereen, she doesn't have problems. She doesn't have the solutions here in King's Landing either. So I think the whole sort of Meereen experiment was not an entirely successful one. It didn't exactly lay the groundwork for everything to go smoothly in King's Landing. And happy birthday to Dylan. And yeah, Jake, I think Jon was holding dragon bones in the dragon pit. It seems pretty crazy that people would just leave dragon bones scattered on the ground in the dragon pit for years. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Maybe they were dumped there later. Maybe like Cersei just dumped those dragon skulls in the dragon pit out of her basement because she decided to do some spring cleaning or something. It does indeed seem really odd. But I mean, they were just there as props to illustrate Daenerys' points about the dragons, I suppose. Oh, but yeah, another thing that I might mention in the video is the whole thing of like the Grand Maester conspiracy, yeah, because some people, such as Marwyn the Mage, seem to suggest that the decline of the dragons and their eventual extinction might have had something to do with the intervention of the Maesters. Maybe it wasn't just captivity in the dragon pit, maybe the Maesters were poisoning them or something. So that's an interesting possibility to discuss. Alpandia on the Reddit talks about how cool it is to see all these reunions, and it is so amazing having all these main characters in one place. Rhaegar in the chat suggests that dragon bones, yeah, in the books, dragon bones are meant to be black, but in the show, for whatever reason, they've just made them regular old bone color, which is a little boring, but I suppose at the same time they want to make it clear to viewers that they are dragon bones. If they made them black, they might think they were like, you know, sculpture or something. I think it's fair enough to make them just look like bone. Could the actions of the Maesters in the show support the Grand Maester conspiracy? Benjamin asks. I doubt the show's thinking that deep about it, because the Maesters in the show are pretty ambivalent about the whole White Walker thing. They're just sort of like, oh, well, you know, give us evidence and we'll believe it. Like, I don't think there's any, like, sinister secrets going on there. So, yeah, I doubt the show's thinking about that. And, yeah, all the reunions were cool. Brienne and the Hound were especially adorable, talking about Arya, like a couple of soccer mums. But in the meeting, one of the many notable things that happened was the Hound confronting Gregor, which I think was pretty obvious, like, fan service. Like, they're obviously responding to the wide popularity of the Clegane Bowl theory, and I think that's what they mean, Lemon Cakes. I think they're saying, I think Sandor is saying that I'm what's coming for you, Mountain, and Clegane Bowl's gonna happen, which raises for me the interesting sort of meta question of, like, is the reason why Clegane Bowl is happening, is it because George Martin has been planning it all along, or is it because fans invented the idea, popularized it, and now they're going to put it in the show? And hell, maybe George Martin will put it in the books as a result. It is funny that we live in this sort of new media age where fan input can become canon in these kinds of stories. It's pretty exciting. But yeah, I mean, fan service is a derogatory term a lot of the time, but Casso Mano in the chat suggests that's the kind of fan service we want, right? I'm not complaining if they do Clegane Bowl. I think it'll be fun. And I think there are ways that it could be made very meaningful for the Hound's character. And there's also the question of Bronn. Puffer Pig in the Reddit raises the question of Bronn, and I think it's near certain that Bronn will turn his cloak and join the good guys. I hate to say the good guys, but unless you want to say the Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen coalition every time, they're obviously the good guys. That's what we have to call them, I think, and Bronn, I think, will join them because, you know, Tyrion this episode was talking about, like, Bronn, remember my offer, I'll pay you double, come over to my side, and, you know, last episode, Bronn was saying, like, I'm not going to be in King's Landing when the dragons come, like, I'm gonna leave, like, Bronn it has been, telegraphed really obviously, I think, that Bronn, will turn his cloak and leave the Lannisters and presumably join the good guys. That said, you know, Bronn's whole thing is about, you know, survival and looking after himself. It could be said that, you know, marching off to join the zombies or to fight the zombies is not necessarily in the interests of his survival. So maybe, you know, maybe he'll just leave for bloody Castle Stokeworth or something and sit back with Lollys and have a cocktail or something. I think that would be in character if Bronn just left. Most characters, I would be irritated if they just dropped out of the story with no closure. But Bronn's whole thing is that he's the one guy who doesn't have some, like, deep, complex, you know, loss or vengeance or deep thing. Like, Bronn's whole thing is just like, yeah, I want money and I want women and I'd like to not die, thank you. You know, please and thank you. So I think it would be appropriate for Bronn to just sort of leave. Although I think the likely outcome is that he'll join the good guys and fight the zombies. Daenerys turns up at the dragon pit in a suitably spectacular form, swooping in on her dragon. She knows how to make an entrance because she's had a fair bit of practice at this point, right? Daenerys has done a lot of dragon entrances. I'm sure someone could make a nice compilation. I'm almost tempted in the video to make some silly joke about some similarity to, like, Olympic diving, like sort of sticking, or acrobatics, like sticking the landing and stuff, and sort of rating it 8 out of 10 or something. It's almost like Kramer's entrances in Seinfeld, how Kramer would, like, burst through the door in all these different spectacular ways, like how Dany lands Drogon and entering in a whole bunch of ridiculous ways. But that's probably too dumb to say in the video. And then there's the actual meeting. So we had Euron coveting Dany's dragons, which obviously connects to the whole plots in the book about the dragon horn and Euron trying to steal Daenerys's dragons and indeed wanting to steal Daenerys herself. So a comparison to Euron's book plots there is good as well. But I found this whole thing interesting about you know, Euron standing up and getting aggressive against Tyrion and Theon, and then Cersei telling him to shut up, and then Euron eventually storming off. I feel like, I mean, we know that Euron storming off and saying that he was going to the Iron Islands, we know that is a lie. That was prearranged by Cersei for him to go pick up the Golden Company. So I wonder if this earlier thing as well, when Euron gets vocal and aggressive, might also have been a deliberate plant by Cersei. Because it reminds me of that bit in Feast when Sansa and Littlefinger are in the Vale and they have a meeting with the Lords of the Vale, and this guy Lyn Corbray gets all aggressive and waves his sword around in the middle of this peaceful meeting. And that intervention by Lyn ends up being strategically beneficial to Littlefinger because it sort of throws off the other lords and it makes them embarrassed that one of their party, Lyn, is on their side. It makes them all sort of thrown off and apologetic. And so right away, Littlefinger has the sort of upper hand. The table sort of shifts in his favor because Lyn has made the other lords look bad. And so I feel like it's kind of similar what's happening here with Euron. Euron, in the middle of this peaceful meeting, just gets up and starts getting up in everyone's grill. Although in this case, the analogy with Lyn breaks down because Lyn was on the side of the Lords. So the analogy is different because Cersei, you know what I mean. But maybe this could still be a deliberate ploy by Cersei. Maybe Cersei deliberately wanted Euron to get up and get aggressive because that allowed her to threaten Theon and to threaten Tyrion and to look strong and to remind Dany's side that they have Yara hostage, which is an important strategic thing. But by also shushing Euron, that makes it look like Cersei is, well, you know, despite that, I'm still willing to be peaceful, I'm still willing to cooperate. So she sort of has her cake and eats it too. She uses Euron to threaten Dany without looking like she's actually being aggressive herself. So maybe that was a deliberate ploy by Cersei, or maybe Euron just has a big mouth. And what's next? Oh, yeah, I also thought it was kind of funny when Euron storms off and says, "Oh, I'm going to go to my island, and Dany, you should go to your island too." And then after the war's over, he sort of implies that, well, you and me are going to be the last people in Westeros after everyone's been killed by the zombies. It's just going to be you and me. It'll be like Adam and Eve. There's that page on TV Tropes about the sort of recurring meme of the last man and woman being obliged to repopulate the earth, and I feel like Euron might almost be hinting at that with Dany, because we all know he's got a bit of a crush on the dragon woman. As do many, which is something we'll mention with Tyrion later. But the centerpiece of this whole meeting, obviously, is the White, the zombie, who they demonstrate. And I thought the way this was done physically was kind of fun, with the White jumping at Cersei and being jerked back by the chain. I still find it a little difficult to get over the whole sort of logical disconnect of, they do successfully demonstrate the White to all of these people, but then Cersei asks, "Oh, so how many of them are there?" And Daenerys says, "Oh, there's 100,000. And everyone's like, "Oh shit, 100,000 zombies, that's a big problem." But like, the whole issue is that one zombie doesn't prove that there are 100,000 zombies beyond the wall. It proves that zombies are a thing, which they sort of already know with like Gregor and stuff, but the actual threat is not the existence of zombies. The threat is the existence of 100,000 zombies beyond the wall, and that's not something you can prove with a single zombie. So here we are complaining again about the whole White plot, but so it is, I think. But yeah, I thought that was basically fine. I think one of the really good things about this episode is that Cersei's plot actually kind of makes sense. But first, we have the meeting between Tyrion and Cersei. Oh yeah, we also have Jon's whole thing. I thought it was interesting, like, that they're saying, Jon in this scene was pressured into swearing to Cersei that he would not take up arms against the Lannisters as a condition for Cersei to make peace with Dany, so she can go fight the Whites. And everyone was like, "Oh, but Jon stays truthful and he refuses to swear an oath that he knows he can't keep." And everyone compares that to Ned Stark, or Jon compares that to Ned Stark, saying like, "Oh, Ned's honesty got him killed." And I think it's an interesting asterisk there that, it wasn't really Ned's honesty that was the problem. In fact, Ned lied a fair bit. Ned lied to Robert, to his best friend Robert, about the contents of his will, or at least he deceived Robert on that. And Ned obviously lied about the parentage of Jon Snow for all these years. He was haunted by his lies and stuff. So it's not even really lies that was the problem with Ned. It was more his mercy, is how Varys puts it in Book 1. Mercy was what killed Ned, which is rather different to what Jon's doing here. So there's a difference there, but I don't know if that's worth bringing up in the video. And we have the meeting of Cersei and Tyrion. And something I want to get into in the video is just to sort of better contextualize this relationship for the viewers, because the exact reasons behind Cersei and Tyrion's enmity is complex. Benjamin argues in the chat that Benjamin argues that there's a distinction between social lies and political lies. That's an interesting idea. So maybe like Ned made social lies but not political ones. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I'd argue that deceiving Robert about the contents of his will constitutes a political deception. But that's something to explore. Anyway, so I want to talk about the relationship between Cersei and Tyrion in the video. I think you'll kind of already know about that. There are some interesting details, though. Like, I thought it's kind of funny that earlier Tyrion calls Cersei the most murderous woman in the world. I'm pretty sure Daenerys has killed more people than Cersei has. Certainly directly she has. Dany has roasted hundreds of people on a dragon. She's crucified people. She's committed people to death. All the wars that she's started. Like, Daenerys is probably the most murderous person in the world of Ice and Fire that we know of. But here, Tyrion is calling her the most murderous. I feel like sometimes, not to use the phrase of bad writing again, but I think one of the signs of that sometimes is using too many superlatives. I think superlatives are like a lazy, easy way to give your writing gravity. And, you know, recently we had Tyrion say that the Dragon Pit is the most dangerous place in the world. And in the previous episode, we said that Daenerys is the most important person in the world, and she can't go to the most dangerous place in the world, which in that case they're referring to Beyond the Wall. They keep saying the most, the biggest, the absolute, which I think those are superlatives, and I think what you do when you use them is it's like a cheap way to say this is something that you should care about, viewer, and I don't think it's inappropriate. I don't think it's great subtle writing. The Underblast points out that there was the Sept bombing. So yeah, Cersei absolutely has killed lots of people. I suspect that Dany has killed more, though, depending on how you count it. Dany's never plotted to kill anyone, yeah, but she's started a whole bunch of wars, and she's I don't know, whatever. We're getting bogged down, but Cersei and Tyrion scene was interesting, I think. Cersei's accusation was that Tyrion has always wanted to destroy the family, which I also find kind of funny because Cersei has killed more Lannisters than Tyrion has. Cersei killed Kevin Lannister and Lancel Lannister, whereas Tyrion has only killed Tywin Lannister. But of course, it is absolutely true that Tyrion's murder of Tywin kind of led to the downfall of House Lannister in a lot of ways. Although also some of the blame rests on Cersei for, you know, she being at the helm of House Lannister is not exactly the best thing for House Lannister. And Stephanie Morris points out that there are different motives behind the murder, Cersei's murders and Dany's murders. Dany does things in the name of justice and righteousness, and Cersei does things because she wants to, and she wants self-gratification and more power for herself. And I think that's absolutely true. I would often question Dany's ideas of justice sometimes. I mean, many of her wars are based on her whole idea of her entitlement to the throne, which is in itself suspect for a bunch of reasons. One queen's vengeance is another queen's justice, Cardinal Doomsday says, and yeah, I agree. I think Dany's murders are morally questionable as well. Anyway, so what's next? Oh, the pregnancy. The pregnancy is an interesting topic. So we see in this scene that Cersei sort of subtly indicates to her belly and her pregnancy so that Tyrion realizes that she's pregnant. And then Cersei, I think, sort of uses that. Like, we don't know what happens in the conversation after that, but I think what's happening in that scene is that Cersei uses her pregnancy to say, hey, look, I've actually got something to live for. I've actually got something to defend. I've actually got a good motive in the world. I'm not just made up of vengeance and self-destruction and anger. I'm pregnant and I have something to live for and defend. And for that reason, it makes sense that I want to join in your little peace club. I'm more trustworthy because I'm pregnant. Because, you know, we all know that Cersei pretty much lives to protect her children, and outside of that, she just wants to destroy everything. So I think Cersei is using her pregnancy strategically, just like how with Jaime she used her pregnancy to assure Jaime's loyalty, by saying never betray me again, just when they were hugging over the pregnancy. So in these two episodes, Cersei has always been using this pregnancy strategically, which, yes, as Diana Rook suggests in the chat, maybe Cersei is lying about the pregnancy. It does seem a bit convenient, doesn't it, that she's been utilizing her pregnancy strategically in so many ways like that. And of course, you know, there was that great quote in Clash of Cersei saying that tears are not a woman's only weapon. The other one is between her legs. Cersei uses femininity and the female body as a weapon, and a perfect example of that is her pregnancy being used to assure Jaime's loyalty and to make the peace deal possible with Tyrion. So given that, I think it's quite plausible that the pregnancy is fake. Or the pregnancy is real and she just happens to be exploiting it strategically as well. I think either way is fine. But whichever way it's working, I quite liked the way Cersei's using this. I think it's very in keeping with Cersei's themes, and I think it's very much in keeping with her character. But again, I would be surprised if Cersei having a baby becomes a thing. I don't know if there are 9 months left in this story, And there's the whole Maggie the Frog 3 children thing to be considered. I certainly don't think in the books Cersei will bear another child, so something bad will happen to this pregnancy, I expect. Malka Leica suggests that she has cancer. Perhaps that's also a possibility. Jaime leaves. Jaime finally breaks up with Cersei. And he wears a black cloak. He discards his crimson and gold Lannister armor, and he wears a black cloak. We have questions in the Reddit from Sabrin and Curtain of 24. I think Jaime could potentially join the Night's Watch at some point. I don't think it's a sure thing, but all this black horse and this black cloak, to me, hints at that. I mean, the implication, obviously, I think, is that Jaime is going to join the good guys in the fight against the zombie, and obviously there's part of Jaime's whole redemption arc and wanting to be a good person and keep his promises and all of that. And obviously there's finally a vindication of what book readers have wanted for so long, for Jaime to finally break up with Cersei. But Curtain of 24 asks about whether Jaime could be Azor Ahai. And there are some interesting arguments for that being the case, but I think, certainly in the books, it's made pretty clear that one of the conditions of being Azor Ahai is that you're from the line of Aerys and Rhaella Targaryen. So unless you want to argue that Jaime and Cersei are the children of Aerys, which I find unlikely, debatable but unlikely, it's probably impossible straight off the bat for Jaime to be Azor Ahai. It's an argument, it's a discussion to have, but at this point I think anyone being Azor Ahai other than Jon and Dany, and maybe Rhaegar if you want to get a bit fruity, any other than those possibilities seems a bit unlikely. Although we should talk about Cersei's whole plan here. I really like the fact that Cersei's plan actually kind of makes sense. Like, she makes some really good points here. Like, she says that, alright, like, okay, fine, so let's say the army of the dead is real and it's a threat. How is us joining Dany even going to help? Like, we could march north with all the others. We could fight against the dead. But if Dany's dragons and are unsullied and are Dothraki and all the north aren't enough to beat the zombies, then how are we going to help either, right? So I think that's a good argument for why Cersei shouldn't need to come along. And I think Cersei's whole scheme of, like, trying to pretend to make a peace deal to force Jon to promise not to attack the Lannisters, while at the same time doing that feint with Euron to go pick up the Golden Company, like, I think that's a really clever way to shift the tables in Cersei's favor. I think she's still fucked, and Jaime still identifies that she's still doomed. She just can't beat Dany's dragons is basically the problem. But as Cersei points out, well, the dragons are vulnerable because one wasn't at the dragon pit, and Cersei made that good argument that, like, Dany's trying to show her strength here. So I think Cersei's plot actually makes sense here strategically. Her idea of sending away the good guys so that she can gather her strength and try to be as strong as she can in the next season. Oh, that's a good point. Jemima Vivian in the live chat points out that Jaime can tell Dany about Cersei's deception. That's a really good point. I mean, they were going to find out pretty soon anyway, though, right? I mean, like, Cersei said that, oh, the Lannisters are going to go north with Daenerys, but, like, Daenerys, as soon as they leave, would notice that the Lannisters aren't coming with them, right? So, like, I think there immediately would be suspicion from Dany's side anyway. But yeah, the things that Jaime could tell Dany about Cersei will certainly be useful anyway. Trying to read all the chat comments at the same time is a little tricky, but it might be a while. It might be a while before Jaime joins up with the good guys. He might have other business to do in the meantime. I wouldn't be surprised if it's only sort of halfway through season 8 or something that he joins the action, because yeah, it would be pretty significant in a lot of ways for Jaime to join them. It would be funny if Jaime got imprisoned, because of course, people probably wouldn't trust Jaime at first. So it would be kind of funny if Jaime got imprisoned yet again for a while under Dany's charge. But yeah, it'll be fascinating, obviously, to see how Jaime interacts with all those guys. Varys needs to relaunch his spy network, 55 Bueller suggests, and I couldn't agree more. What's next? So then, Littlefinger, Winterfell. Oh boy. So this was obviously one of the most criticized part of last episode, was the whole conflict between Arya and Sansa. And then in this episode in Winterfell, we have another conversation between Littlefinger and Sansa, with Littlefinger suggesting that, Arya wants to become the Lady of Winterfell, which is such a nonsensical suggestion, right? I mean, the last thing Arya wants to be is the Lady of Winterfell, just like she told Ned in season 1. She doesn't want to be a lady in a castle. She's never had any inclination towards ruling or political power. She wants freedom and independence and adventure and exploration. She wants to sail into the West, And you could argue that that Littlefinger doesn't know this about Arya. But supposedly Littlefinger did know enough about Arya to know that Arya would side with Jon instead of siding with Sansa as Lady of Winterfell. Because if Littlefinger didn't know that about Arya, then why would he even need to drive a wedge between Arya and Sansa? The only reason why that was necessary was because Arya would presumably have supported Jon's claim and not stood by while Sansa undermined Jon and became the Lady of Winterfell. That was the only reason why that was necessary, right? I mean, you could argue that the conflict in and of itself helped in driving Sansa towards Littlefinger. That's probably true. But if it were the case that Arya was not super loyal to Jon, then I think Littlefinger could have engineered Sansa's rise anyway. Sorry if I'm talking too fast, but did any of this make any sense? I'm not sure. The big question, obviously, in the Reddit, we have people asking whether Arya and Sansa were playing Littlefinger from the start. Like, were they in last episode staging that whole conflict as a way of like lulling Littlefinger into a false sense of security? I think likely not, because there were multiple separate scenes of Arya getting aggressive against Sansa. The only way that could be part of some conspiracy between Arya and Sansa against Littlefinger was if we assume that Littlefinger was secretly spying on them both the entire time, which there's no indication of in the show. And even if there was, even if you accept that Littlefinger's spy network is so great and so vast that he could have seen whatever Arya and Sansa are doing, surely you have to also assume that he would have seen whatever other secret conversations Arya and Sansa would have had to have in order to have an actual secret underlying conspiracy, and all these discussions with like Bronzion Royce and stuff that must have also happened. So I think there's a lot of like special pleading that you have to do in order to make a cooperation between Arya and Sansa work. I think the cooperation had to begin in between this episode and the last one. And yeah, Phones is suggesting, that like, Arya was playing the game of faces and all of that, like she was just testing Sansa or just nodding and winking to Sansa and handing the dagger to her. Like there's lots of ways you can try to sort of twist it, but I don't see any way that can work strategically as a way to work against Littlefinger. I mean, maybe even if we assume that like Arya was like, had no intention of actually going against Sansa, but she was just trying to nod and wink to say that like, we actually know what Littlefinger's up to. Sansa obviously didn't get it, or at that point, I don't think she got it. Which puts Arya in danger and just create like if it's the case that Arya knew that Littlefinger was manipulating them, why would you not just say it? Maybe there are spies, but if there are spies, the show should have indicated that to us in some way. That there are ways that this could have been done a lot better. Is I think my main complaint. Like they could have had just a couple of shots of like Littlefinger or Littlefinger, the woman Littlefinger was talking to, like the spy who handed him the letter. If they showed her like lurking in a doorway, and then Arya sees the woman lurking in the doorway, and then she makes some vague reference to like the acting that she did in Bravos or something, or like I think there are ways that they could have made this more compelling thematically, but they didn't. It was quasi fun in the Reddit who was questioning this stuff. I got my notes up now properly. There was a technical problem, but Hairless Oyster complains about this as well in the Reddit. So here's what I think. Here's what I think is the most likely explanation, though. I think the most likely explanation for everything that happened was that after the end of this episode, Arya had been legitimately aggressive towards Sansa. It was based on these childhood resentments. She got a bit emotional, and Sansa was just getting defensive, and basically everything that we saw was real, I think. But then they had a bit of cooling off. Arya had a little bit of a think and maybe started to realize that Littlefinger manipulated her to some extent. But then more importantly, Bran had a conversation with one of them, right? If Bran, if they just had a proper conversation with Bran and asked him, hey, what were we talking about before about chaos as a ladder? Can you look more into Littlefinger's schemes? Can you try and make sense of all this? I think Bran could have helped. But I mean, yeah, we're not really meant to think about this, I don't think. As Swifty Squad says in the chat, the writers just wanted us to be surprised. That's why this happened this way, I think. But yeah, no, I think what basically happened is that Bran got some further insight, talked to Sansa and Arya, then the Starks all conspired and set up this trap for Littlefinger where Littlefinger was killed. Because yeah, again, like whatever way you look at this, there had to be like ongoing conspiracy, secret conversations between Sansa and Arya and Bran. And if that's the case, then those conversations could have been spied on just as easily as those earlier conversations with Sansa and Arya could have been. So I struggle to believe that those earlier conversations were somehow fake, even though it could have been done in that way based on Arya's acting and Game of Faces and all that. There's multiple interpretations, but I think that's the one that makes sense from my perspective, at least. And yeah, obviously Littlefinger's decision-making here is pretty dumb. Like, as soon as Bran said to him, chaos is a ladder, Littlefinger must have known, well, shit, this kid's on to me. This kid has supernatural knowledge. It's a bad idea for us, for me to continue this way. But the real grievance I have with this scene, I think, is when Littlefinger gets caught, and Sansa starts listing his crimes, and Sansa says, you killed my Aunt Lysa, and Littlefinger admits to the crime. He admits to the crime straight off the bat, which is such an incredibly stupid thing to do. Because in Season 5, there was like that whole thing, or Season 4 maybe, there was that whole thing of Littlefinger cleverly getting out of the murder accusation against Lysa. That was like a whole thing that they did, where Littlefinger cleverly got out of it. And now he just throws it away by just admitting, yep, nope, that was me, and then breaking down emotionally and losing his shit and completely failing to defend himself. He totally could have defended himself if he was smarter about it. And, you know, perhaps the conclusion we're meant to draw from this is that Littlefinger was just so shocked about Sansa turning on him. It was just completely unthinkable for Littlefinger that his love Sansa would turn on him, and that was why he reacted so poorly. But should it be that much of a shock? I mean, yeah, I guess, you know, he was blinded by his creepy love or whatever, but I don't know, he just seemed to go down a little bit too easy. It could have been worse. Like, I am still glad that his basic plot of planting the letter to turn Arya and Sansa against each other, I think that basically made sense, which was good. But yeah, I don't think anyone's unhappy that Winterfell plot is done. I think it was a contrived B plot that they were just trying to tie up quickly. Anything in the chat? All right. And then we have Theon. We have the scene of Theon Greyjoy. We had that scene with Jon, where he's chatting. Oh shit, sorry, Yep, Theon. Can you all see that? Cool. We had the scene with Theon and Jon talking, and Theon basically sort of lays out his sort of emotional pain, talking about his upbringing with, like, between the Greyjoys and the Starks, and he sort of tried to do the right thing but couldn't. You all sort of know this stuff. And then Jon sort of says, well, you know, you can be a Stark and a Greyjoy. As far as I'm concerned, you're both, and that's great, and I accept you. Which, you know, maybe feels a little bit too... You know, sorry, yeah, as Super Angry Pac-Man points out in the chat, the whole conversation with Sansa in Molestown, that sort of indicated that Sansa was pretty tired of Littlefinger's shit already, you know? Like Littlefinger totally had lots of warning that Sansa was not totally on his side. So, yeah, Littlefinger totally should have seen this coming, and he was a bit too easily thrown off. But yeah, the Theon scene. So it was really nice to see Theon get acceptance and get closure. I think what this was closure of Theon's character arc and development. I don't think he'll necessarily die soon or anything, but the show has very little time to give closure to very many characters, and I think this was the conclusion of Theon's arc. Acceptance, what he was looking for all this time. Family. He just wanted people to love him and accept him for who he was, and I think that's what John gave him. But obviously the undertone is that, yeah, as Stephanie Morris, I think, says it well, it was heavy-handed, but it was nice. It was a bit obvious. It did seem a bit too easy, you know, like all these seasons and years of Theon's pain and conflict, for it not to be tied in it so simply and easy does seem like a little bit of a cop-out. But you know, they haven't got a lot of time. I think they did it more or less appropriately. But the whole thing about saying you can be a Greyjoy and a Stark, I think that definitely is laying the groundwork for Jon to embrace an identity as both a Targaryen and a Stark, because that's going to be his whole problem. He thinks of himself as a Northman. He thinks of himself as the son of Ned Stark, and he's going to have a bit of an identity crisis when he finds out that, shit, I'm actually the son of Rhaegar Targaryen. I'm actually the heir. That's going to create conflict with Daenerys. We'll talk about that later, but I think that's sort of what the groundwork was. The whole biffo, the whole fist fight between Theon and that Ironborn guy, I think it's worth questioning whether a fist fight is the best sort of metaphorical arena to show Theon's sort of internal struggle. Does every character arc, every drama have to end with violence? Do all problems have to be solved by hitting things really hard? It gets a little tiresome, but there definitely are thematic things about that scene that were really great. Like the whole thing of the Greyjoy, the Ironborn words of like the idea of what is dead may never die, but rises harder and stronger. Theon didn't just stand up and overwhelm his enemy through overwhelming force. He kept getting knocked down, but he just kept on getting back up, and that was what gave him his strength. And then, you know, he kneels at the water and he gives himself like a baptism in the salt water. So one of his whole things in like season 2 or 3 was when Theon went to the Ironborn and he sort of re-embraced his Greyjoy identity, and he had Aeron or some drowned priest baptizing him in the salt water. Except that was sort of an aborted, that was sort of a false start. That was an identity, a rebirth that didn't quite work out for the better, because of course that was his whole sort of Theon turned cloak phase. But now he's giving himself this new identity, this final true identity of both a Greyjoy, both a Stark, and I think this is where his character finds some kind of peace. Although there is the whole sort of oh yeah, in the chat, it also shows that Theon is not weak, Zvon says, which also works with the Ironborn thing, yeah, but I think it also connects to his whole like torture and being beaten down by Ramsay. I mean, a lot of that was psychological, but there was also an element of like the physical, and I think maybe Theon, I mean, the show doesn't really explore it, but if you, to put not too fine a point on it, if you have your dick cut off, you're probably going to wrestle with issues of masculinity, alright? What does it mean to be a man if I don't have a cock? And spoiler alert, masculinity has a fair bit to do with physical strength, physical dominance. Maybe Theon reasserting his physical dominance by winning that fist fight is an important thing for him personally with his masculine identity, having lost his dick. I think that makes sense. But also part of that, I think, will be rescuing Yara. That sort of re-showing his strength, his masculinity, showing he's still worth something. Although he might fail in his rescue of Yara. I could easily see Yara getting rescued, but Theon dying. I think that would be a bit obvious, but one potentially interesting end to his character. Alrighty. Then we have R plus L equals J. Who would have thunk it? Who saw this coming? Not a single person saw this coming. It was pretty fucking cool to see Rhaegar Targaryen. It was pretty cool to see him marrying Lyanna Stark. People have been waiting for this for decades, and the first Game of Thrones Ultra Text video was about R plus L equals J, so it is really cool on many, many levels to see this happening. And there's a lot to say about it. Pufferpig in the Reddit suggests that the appearance of Rhaegar was perhaps a bit underwhelming. I tend to agree, because Rhaegar is described as like one of the most beautiful, otherworldly beauties in the world, and he doesn't really look like that, does he? He just looks like a tall Viserys. He looks a lot like Viserys, a lot of people have noted. And it's good that he looks like Viserys, but yeah, he should probably be a little bit prettier, shouldn't he? One of the things about the marriage is that in my head canon, I always imagined this marriage happening at the Isle of Faces, because at least in the books, well, yeah, strictly not true, but Bran's visions are often connected to looking through a heart tree, and the whole old gods, the whole northern custom of marrying before a heart tree is linked to that idea of the old gods or the green seers only being able to see you when you're in front of a tree. And the Isle of Faces has a whole bunch of weirwood trees in it, and the Isle of Faces was very near Harrenhal, which is near where Rhaegar abducted Lyanna. So I think in the books it makes sense for the marriage to have happened there. Yes, but no matter how much confirmation we get, Stephanie Morris suggests that R plus L equals D will still be a theory. There will always be contrarians, but that's a lot harder to stand on these days. And yeah, Kelly points out that Rhaegar doesn't really look like a badass warrior either. But I guess, you know, you're not going to wear your sick black armor to your wedding, necessarily. Yeah, cool. So yeah, R plus L equals J. What else? Puffer Pig in the Reddit pointed out that we also learn from this scene how Bran's powers work a bit more. Because we have that whole bit with Bran saying, "Oh, did you know, Sam, that Jon's real name is Jon Sand?" And then Sam says, "Nope, so much for your omniscience, he's actually called Aegon Targaryen." Or he was talking about the marriage, rather. The point being that Bran, he doesn't know everything. He just has the ability to find out anything if he knows sort of where and when and what to look for. So he's like Google, someone said in the Reddit, I think. Which is cool. I think that's an appropriate limitation on Bran's power. Because if you have a character who's omniscient, like obviously he should win everything immediately. The fact that Bran, you know, his visions are hazy, he needs to know what he's looking for to find it. I think that actually, yeah, Brandon Winslow says that he has access to the information, but he doesn't have all the information, and accessing it can be tricky. So I think that's a really appropriate sort of nerf to Bran's power, and I think that could work well going ahead. I mean, obviously one of the things that was suspect about this scene was Bran's whole thing saying that Robert's rebellion was based on a lie because Rhaegar didn't really rape Lyanna; they were in love. Therefore, Robert's rebellion was a lie. But I mean, Rhaegar's abduction of Lyanna was not the only cause of the war. Right, there was the murder of Rickard and Brandon Stark by Aerys. There was Aerys demanding the heads of Ned and Robert, if I'm not mistaken. There were lots of big reasons why the war happened, and Rhaegar and Lyanna was not the only one. So yeah, that's something to talk about in the video. But there's also the issue of Jon's name, Aegon Targaryen. Etelmina in the Reddit complains that it's pretty silly for Rhaegar to have two sons called Aegon, because of course, before having Jon with Lyanna, Rhaegar had Rhaenys and Aegon with Elia Martell. So why would you name two of your sons Aegon? I think maybe there are some excuses you could make for this. You could say that, like, oh, well, maybe Rhaegar somehow knew some prophetic vision that he had that his original Aegon and Rhaenys and Elia would die in Robert's rebellion. Maybe part of why Rhaegar was so sad and mopey and emo all the time is that he knew that Robert's rebellion and the deaths of all these people would happen. Well, no, except that can't be true because he died at the Trident. Maybe he knew he'd die at the Trident. See, here's the problem with omniscient characters. We're going to talk about this more with the Night King, but having characters know everything and foreseeing events is bullshit, and I'll tell you why later. But yes, look, I think look, you want to know the real reason why they called Jon Aegon, in my opinion? I think it's because it's easier to say than Jaehaerys. I think that's why. I mean, there's also the Aegon the Conqueror connection, which is nice. You know, Aegon's a good Targaryen name. It's like the John Smith of Valyria. I think they just called it Aegon because it sounds nice and it's kind of recognizable. Maybe they should have made it Aemon, because people kind of remember Maester Aemon, and that has a nice connection with Jon. Some people do theorize that Jon will be called Aemon in the books, and yeah, I don't think Jon will be called Aegon in the books. I think that just seems a bit too silly. I mean, there is that whole complexity about how, you know, Rhaegar seemed to be naming his children after the three siblings of Aegon the Conqueror, Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. So his next child you would think would be called Visenya, but Visenya is a woman's name and Jon is a male. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of different ideas, which all could be good. But yeah, let's just call Jon Egg from now on. That's probably for the best. And Camera Coke 12 in the comments asks about why Bran didn't hear the name Aegon Targaryen in the first place. I think in his visions last season, I think that speaks to the haziness of Bran's visions. He's not able to catch every detail. Although, yeah, I mean, you'd think that if he can access anything, you think he would have had another listen to the name of his cousin. But yeah, look, I wouldn't expect too much consistency or detail on how Bran's visions work. At the end of the day, the show is going to do what makes things most dramatic. Egg Snow. That is a great name, isn't it? Egg Snow. Sounds like a Christmas beverage. Alright, so what's after R plus L equals J? Well, during R plus L equals J, we have a bit of boat sex. We have Dany and Jon making love. And we have Tyrion standing and watching. Like Forrest Gump, he likes to watch. And a lot of people are confused about Tyrion's response to this. Cat of the Canals in the Reddit asked why Tyrion was watching. Some people think that, oh, well, maybe Tyrion is in love with Dany, and so he's jealous of Jon having sex with Dany. I think anyone would be jealous of Jon having sex with Dany, but I don't think this is quite the reason behind Tyrion's concern. One of the big sort of themes about love relationships in Game of Thrones is the whole love is the death of duty, right? Aemon would say. And Barristan Selmy in the books is always concerned about Dario and Dany's relationship. There's this whole theme of like tragic romances and how putting your love ahead of your duty can lead to all sorts of terrible things and wars and unpleasantness. And I think that's likely to be a theme of Jon and Dany's relationship in Season 8. If they start prioritizing each other and their own relationship over policy and war and what's going on, that could have negative effects for the story, especially if some kind of Nissa-Nissa-ing is required. If it is the case that Daenerys needs to be sacrificed by Jon as Nissa-Nissa in order to save the world, which I don't think they'll do in the show, but if they do, obviously a love relationship between Jon and Dany would make that harder, although maybe that would also lend power to the sacrifice. One, of course, you know, it doesn't bear saying that one of the great sort of themes is people sacrificing. Loving sacrifice is the most powerful magic in the world. That's Harry Potter, right? Lily Potter's love made Harry invincible and all of that. So whether or not Game of Thrones will go down that path, who knows? Yeah, Benjamin Safir points out that Jon and Dany are actually like a really smart political alliance that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I mean, it should work. They should probably get married first. Not to get all biblical about it, but just for the sake of political clarity, it would probably make sense for Jon and Dany to marry. But I don't know, they'll find some way to complicate it. I think there's a lot of different opinions on the sort of chemistry between Jon and Dany, whether their relationship feels right in that respect. I think it's fine. They do seem, it's a pretty sad kind of love, isn't it? They don't seem to be having a lot of fun. But you wouldn't, because she's still grieving about her dragon child, and Jon is, you know, he's Jon. He hasn't cracked a smile since season 2, so. You know, they're both kind of sad sacks, but they've both had a lot of very similar experiences. They've both got similar responsibilities. I think it feels right enough for them to get together. It feels inevitable. People have been shipping them since 1996, so I'm happy enough with Jon and Dany together. And then we have the wall coming down. This was another one of those super long-awaited moments, and certainly a visually spectacular one. Some people have asked about the fire, like what's the dragon spitting? Is that frost? Why would frost take down a wall? On the HBO Viewer's Guide synopsis, it suggests that Viserion is breathing blue fire, so presumably it is hot, it's just coloured blue. Would that kill a zombie? Don't know. I'm sure it'll just do whatever is required of it in the plot at a given time. But I'm happy enough with that. I think it needs to shoot something destructive, and it needs to take down the wall, and it needs to look different to ordinary fire. But so I think that's an appropriate enough decision. Cat of the Canals asks whether Tormund and Beric are alive. I think it's very likely that Beric is alive, if only because he's been talking about his purpose and the Lord of Light a lot lately, right? They really emphasize that a bunch. So for Beric to just die off screen on the wall seems very unlikely. So, and Tormund still needs to represent the wildlings, so I reckon both of those characters are alive. We also have P. Barry 3010 asking about whether the Night King is a Greenseer, because this whole thing of using the dragon to take down the wall might explain what the Night King's plot was all this time. Like we talked in the last episode about how weird is it that the Night King would march on Eastwatch with no apparent mechanism or power to take down the wall. Why would the Night King march towards Eastwatch if he hasn't got a way to get through the wall? Conveniently enough, a dragon turns up, and conveniently enough, he had ice spears to kill it, and he was able to resurrect it and use it to take down the wall. So maybe the lesson here is that the Night King saw this whole thing coming and planned it from the beginning, even though Dany herself didn't know that she was going to come and all of that. And I think you can make that argument, because obviously, yes, the Night King does have Greenseer powers. We saw the Night King grabbing Bran in his vision and stuff. It's totally plausible that the Night King has some psychic abilities or whatever, but I'm really reluctant to make the concession of the Night King seeing everything that's going to happen in advance. Because if you've got Bran, the good guy, who can see everything whenever it's convenient, and then the Night King, who can see everything when it's convenient, then you can just sort of make up the rules narratively. You can just do whatever you want. You can make whatever plot contrivances you want, and you can explain it away by waving your arms and saying he knew it was coming. So I mean, there might be no reason mechanically within the world that they can't do it, but I think it's just a boring story if there's all these omniscient people running around who know everything that's going to happen. It's not entertaining when the characters know everything and the viewers don't, I think. Hairless Oyster suggests that the Night King's horns are dragonglass candle antennae, which seems likely. Yeah, that would work. Maybe here's a better articulation of the problem. I think characters magically knowing things is okay if we know what the mechanics are. Like, yeah, glass candles. Like, glass candles can communicate to... well, actually, no, we don't really know what the rules are with glass candles either. Alright, well, look, I think there are problems with having an omniscient Night King. He obviously has some superpowers, but I think probably the best explanation is the Night King didn't actually know that the dragons were coming, but figured he'd find some way around the wall at Eastwatch. Maybe it's not so crazy to say that, like, the Night King as a Greenseer had some vision of the existence of dragons, and he didn't know that about Daenerys. He didn't know that the specific number of dragons that were going to come, but he did have some vision of fire, and he figured that if he stood around the wall enough as the White Walkers, eventually the dragons would come fight him, and he had the ice spears to be prepared. I suppose we don't need to go the whole hog and say that the Night King saw everything coming. So maybe there's some kind of compromise to be made here, but I still think there are problems with the whole sort of psychic characters knowing everything that's about to happen. As Brandon Winslow says, which I have to agree with. Or yes, indeed, maybe there was some prophecy that the Night King knew about. Maybe Night King is the White Walker Rhaegar. Stephanie suggests that. That would be funny. Any theory where the White Walkers become something more complex than just ice demons, I enjoy. There's a lot of people in the fandom who hate that idea, and I think those people are largely right, that I don't think it'll happen in the books. The idea of the White Walkers, having some humanization or having some complex reasons for what they're doing. I think the likely answer is that they're just a force for destruction, but call me a hippie, but I like the idea of peace being possible. Alright, I think that covers everything. I think I'll just have a flick through some of, because I think we might have skipped a couple of things. But in the chat, chuck in any further questions if you've got burning questions, because this is the last little bit of the last live stream of the season. Throw your questions in the chat if you've got burning ones. Did the Night King know that Littlefinger killed Roz? Shit, we got the hard-hitting questions from Super Angry Pac-Man. The Night King equals Bran theory. Yeah, I don't like that theory, because, we saw the bloke who got turned into the Night King. He's some ancient Andal. And yeah, maybe Bran could have walked into that guy before he got turned into the Night King, or maybe he just walked into the Night King later and just took over the Night King's body or something. But I mean, there's just no evidence for it happening. And I don't know if Bran is even a central enough character to be the big goodie and the big baddie at once. I don't know. And there's also that annoying Photoshop going around of the White Walker symbol on Bran's neck. So I don't know. That theory, frankly, annoys me. All right, people chucking questions. Keep reading the books. There will be more Swift, if that's what you mean. How are you feeling about Season 8? Season 8's like 2 years away, man. So I haven't begun to think, let alone feel about it. Problems with Dany being ex-aunt? Absolutely. I think there will be much... like, Dany is very comfortable being the lone Targaryen. Dany has spent, like, many seasons being like, I'm the last of my kind. I think she'll be... I think she'll be uncomfortable with Jon being a Targaryen, and I think Jon will be uncomfortable with Jon being a Targaryen, so I think that'll be interesting. What kind of magic is in Podrick's cock? It's dragonglass, man. It's pure dragonglass. Where is Howland Reed? I don't think we'll see him again in the show, in the books. He's part of the Grand Northern Conspiracy. Zvons asks 2 years. Well, maybe not exactly 2 years, but the word is that Season 8's not going to start until, like, 2018, or 2019, rather. I don't know if it's official, but it'll be a while. I don't have a timeline on more Swift, but it will happen in the near future, nearer rather than later. Will Jon even want to be king? I don't think he will, but the best kings never do, right? That cliche about the best leaders are the ones who don't want to lead, and that's Jon's whole thing. Jon didn't even want to be Lord Commander. Jon didn't want any of the responsibilities. You know, Ned Stark didn't want to be handed the king. But I think he'll do it anyway. He'll suck it up and he'll be alright at it. That is if the Iron Throne survives. Can we do more live streams of other TV shows? Yeah, there'll be other content covered in the near future. So we'll talk some more about what future plans are. But yeah, we're going to do more Game of Thrones theories, obviously, but we'll also branch out some more into some other series. We'll do some more Reedy stuff. We'll try some other project stuff. It's going to be exciting. It's so dumb that no big characters really died, Jemima says. Yeah, I really get the sense that a lot happened in this season, but kind of nothing happened in this season. It is kind of surprising how few characters died. Especially, I mean, not to bring up the White Plot again, but the White Plot. I mean, Thoros died, but let's be honest. Not many people care about Thoros. Thoros was the least loved of all those characters. Surely they could have culled a few. N3B1 wants Westworld explained videos. That is something that I'd like to do. I think it is likely that we'll do a Westworld explained Season 1 video before Season 2. American Gods. I don't know if American Gods needs an explained video, honestly. But maybe. Season... yeah, alright. Yeah, maybe Season 8 isn't that far away, but... we'll see how it goes. Alright, final questions. We need a show closer, guys. This is the end of the live stream series. This is the end of this series of videos. What's the final exciting question before we conclude? This video, this Season 7, Episode 7 explained video, will be, I think it might be out later than the other ones, possibly. There's obviously a lot to cover, so we'll see what happens. But get it out as soon as possible. Any final questions? A lot of people saying yes to Westworld. Well, Deanna Rook says thanks to everything. Well, thank you. Thank you to all of you guys for participating in this insanity. Yeah, let's finish with that. So you guys have been supporting for years now. A lot of you've been watching the videos. You've been supporting on Patreon. You've been giving a lovely comment. Some of you have even been getting into these crazy side projects like UltraSwiftX. And I want to say again that support and that participation is the only reason why any of this happens. It would be impossible otherwise. Because a lot of work goes into this shit, and none of it could be justified without you guys enjoying it. So thank you so much for watching and for listening and for being a part of this. And I'll try and make this last video really good. So yeah, I think we'll end it there. Any last final moments? Alright, okay, cool. Thank you for participating. We'll get this video out soon. There'll be proper updates, debriefs on Patreon. Have a lovely week. Cheers.